The CompTIA A+ does a pretty good job of enumerating very specific symptoms that point to bad hard drives, and this is going to be one of the times I actually follow along the objectives, and we're going to hit each one of these one by one, but not in the same order CompTIA does it. The one thing I need to warn you about when it comes to bad hard drives is that in today's society, the most expensive part of IT troubleshooting is you. And if you went back even as 10 years ago, there were times where we could actually take a drive that was dying and then try to fix it. Those days are over, my friends. Today, if a hard drive's dying, you're going to be doing a backup and you're going to replace it. So get ready to hear that a little bit. Okay, so let's march through all the different issues that we see on the CompTIA A+, and let's start with slow performance. Slow performance as a problem that points to a hard drive troubleshooting issue is to me a little bit strange, because how do you measure slow performance? Well, you can measure it if you want to. There are baselining tools you can run and you can make all these determinations, but I don't think that's what CompTIA is looking for when they say slow performance. I think what they're talking about is it just feels slower. And if that's the case, we're usually not talking about an actual broken hard drive. We're talking about basic maintenance issues. Many of these are already automated, but I do want to go through these. The two that I want to cover are defragmentation and disk cleanup. So let's start with a little defrag. Now here in Windows 10, defragment and disk cleanup are here under administrative tools. Now, I need to warn you, every version of Windows, I think Microsoft makes it their personal goal to move these to new places. So you're going to find them in different places on different versions of Windows. They're going to have slightly different names. Like for example here in Windows 10 it's called defragment and optimize drives, and all the other versions it's called disk defragmenter. It's probably different names, but you should always be able to locate it. In general, for a lot of these tools, you can actually click on the individual drive letters, right click, go to properties. There's usually a little tools tab, you can get them there as well. But anyway, since we're on 10, we're going to do it from here. So the first one is disk cleanup. Now disk cleanup's also been around for a long time too, and its job is simply to erase as much data off the hard drive as possible to give you more space. When your drives start to fill up, your system's going to slow down a lot, and this is just one great way to give yourself the space that you need. Now, what's interesting is that disk cleanup will come up automatically once it sees that you're running out of hard drive space. I don't remember the percentage exactly. It's pretty small, and you can just run it there. But if you do need to run it manually, you can go through here and run it, and you just select what you want to delete and say clean it up, and it's just a quick eraser of unneeded files. All right, so let's go up to defragment. Now, what's interesting about, especially with Windows 10, is that in the world where you now have SSDs, defragmentation has always been a bit of an issue with those. Now with traditional old school rotational media, hard disk drives, magnetic drives, whatever you want to call them, the process of defragmentation was important because you would start saving files and erasing them, and next thing you know, your files were spread out all over a hard drive. Defragmentation would bring them back together, and it does a nice job for it. Right now, there's a lot of argument that says don't defragment SSDs. What I will tell you is that Windows 10 by default will defragment your SSDs. It doesn't do it nearly as much, so I trust Microsoft, so I'm going to go with those guys. Basically, no matter what you're doing, when you're running a defragger, it's going to have two steps. There'll be an analyze step and then go ahead and do it step. So you just run it and it's great. Now, what's also interesting about defragmentation is that since, gosh, I'll say at least Windows Vista, disk defragmentation comes built in as an automated task every few days, I believe, weekly. It depends on the version of Windows. So it's already running. So if you are having slow performance on a system due to fragmentation, that means you probably went in and turned off the automated disk defragmentation in Windows. So you might want to be a little bit careful about those. If there's any other slow performance issue that these guys don't take care of, well, it's probably a good time to consider backing up all your data and buying yourself a faster drive. Read-write failures can be a very scary thing when it happens on your system. Now, before we get into this, I want to stress that we're not talking about the situations where you forgot to put a DVD into your optical tray, or you thought you had a USB plugged in and you can't get to it, or you've got a network connection. In those cases, those are devices that simply aren't there. What I'm talking about when I say read-write failures is you've got a physical drive in your system and you're getting an error popping on the screen that'll say something like data error writing to drive C, or unable to read from my C drive. I mean, these are very distinct, very clear errors, and they don't happen continually. They'll happen every now and then that point to read and write errors on one physical drive. Now, you can't really fix these in the classical sense, but what we can do is go through error checking. When we run an error check, what we're going to do is we will go through the drive and we will check each block individually, and then we will mark bad blocks. So we put orange cones around our problem is the best way to look at this. So let's go ahead and run some error checking. Now, the easiest way to do this is I'll just go to the drive in question, right click on it, I go to Properties, and there's a Tools tab. Oh, hey, there's Optimize and Defrag. Now, but right here is error checking. So we're going to go ahead and click on that, and we let it go ahead and start going through a scan process. Now, this can take a while. Now, on this particular one, it won't, because I've got a very fast SSD, so it moves pretty quick. What you just saw happen there in a few seconds can literally take hours on a big old school rotational media drive. So that's one way to do error checking. Now, the other way to do error checking is a more old school way, and that's called check disk. And that's actually a command prompt. So let's open up the command prompt. And to do this, you can just type chkdsk and hit enter. And really all this does is it does a quick little scan and reports back. If you want it to actually fix it though, let's run her again. You put in the /F switch. So that means not only just scan it, but actually go ahead and fix it. Now, I'm not going to hit enter right now, and that's because if you're going to run checkdisk/F, Windows is going to reboot, and I'm having too much fun talking to you right now. If I see a read and a write error on a drive once, I'm not going to think about it that much. And these devices burp every now and then. But if I start to see it, say even weekly, I'm going to get paranoid. And for me, the right fix for read-write errors is to, ready, back up your data and get a new drive. CompTIA lists as an objective for hard drive troubleshooting a loud clicking noise. Thank you, CompTIA. Anyway, it is an issue. I'm not saying it's not an issue, but it's probably about one of the scariest things that can happen. So I don't just keep hard drives with clicking noises around, so I thought I'd make a couple of these very scary sounds. So let's listen to scary hard drive sound number 1. Pretty scary, huh? Well, that is a sign of your drive dying. In fact, they don't all sound exactly the same. In fact, let's roll another one. Let's play scary hard drive sound number 2. If your hard drive ever starts to make noise like this, well, there is no utility to run. There's no magic screws to turn. It's time for you, say it with me, kids, back up your drive and get a new hard drive. Whenever I see a situation where a drive isn't recognized, I usually first say to myself, did I install this correctly? Unrecognized drives usually happen during the install process. They can sometimes happen to established drives, but it's not very common. So if you've got a problem with a drive that isn't recognized, basically go through a reinstallation. Number 1, do you have your data connections proper? Do you have power? Does your power connection have power? There's all these little details that we can often miss while we're quickly assembling something that can cause trouble. On top of that, if you're sure everything's well connected, go ahead, boot the system up, and check your BIOS. A good drive that is properly configured and properly plugged in should always show up in your boot devices. If it doesn't show up, well, then you need to think of a little bit. For example, is the controller that you're plugging into turned on? They can be disabled. Are you using AHCI when you should be using a SATA setting for a drive? That can cause trouble. So in those situations, make sure you check the little BIOS details because they can bite you. Now, with all that, if you get it there and your BIOS sees it and Windows doesn't, well, that really is a very hard thing to have happen. Windows has so many built-in drivers for such a broad cross-section of drives that you would be hard-pressed to come up with a scenario where Windows doesn't recognize a drive that your system does. But it could happen. In those situations, take a look at the manufacturer, check them out, and they probably have some specialized driver that isn't in Windows that you install, and everything's good. After going through all this pain and suffering, if the drive is still not recognized, well, it's probably a bad drive. So go out and buy a new one. If you ever run into a situation where you're booting up your computer and you get the operating system not found error, well, first of all, don't panic, okay? There are situations where this can happen, and some of them are actually fairly simple. Number one, did you accidentally leave any boot media in and you're trying to boot off a thumb drive or something like that? Not to say that's ever happened to me, of course, but for you mortals it might. Anyway, make sure you didn't accidentally throw in some boot media that, or unbootable media, and that your system's trying to boot to it. Secondly, go into your BIOS and double check your boot order. There are situations where your BIOS can spontaneously, and I don't know why it happens, like sunspots or something, where boot orders change. Go in there and just make sure your boot order is in the order that it's supposed to be. If that doesn't fix it, well, you may have a little corruption. And these things happen. It happens surprisingly often in a PC. So what you need to do is rebuild your operating system. Now, if you were paying attention in the episodes where I'm showing you how to install Windows, you've got yourself, for whatever version of Windows you have, your Windows repair utility, whatever that version of Windows decides to call it, and you plug it in, or you take your original installation and whatever, you plug them in, and all of these will go through the process of repairing that. Now, it depends on your Windows versions. The later versions do it so automagically, it's a beautiful thing. With older versions, particularly say like Vista, you might have to go through a few manual processes, but the bottom line is that Windows is designed to rebuild all of its boot files and bring it back online. And if that doesn't work, well, friends, you're not going to be backing up because you're not going to be getting that data. Just go ahead and buy yourself a new drive. The fact that CompTIA adds crash screens as a hard drive troubleshooting issue is of interest to me. Crash screens, and if you've never seen these before, let me show you a couple of examples. Like here's the old school Windows blue screen of death. And this one right here, this is the newer version of the same blue screen of death. This right here is the infamous pinwheel of death, courtesy of Apple Corporation. And just for completeness, here's an example of a Linux crash screen. Now, these crash screens are one of the most panic-inducing things that will ever happen to a tech while you're at a machine. But hard drives are probably the least of your concerns in these particular issues. Now, we're going to cover crash screens, in particular the Windows blue screen of death, in other episodes. But at least if you're really thinking that you've got a problem with a hard drive at this point, you need to be able to read the text that accompanies these crash screens. They give you some type of insight. These arrows will often say something like file system or NTFS or something to give you a clue that it's caused by something happening at the hard drive level. And if that is the case, well, we've already discussed the types of fixes you can do. You can go ahead and do error checking. You can do a Windows repair utility. And of course, you can buy yourself a new hard drive. SMART stands for System Monitoring and Reporting Technology. SMART's been around for quite a while now, and there are people who like it, some people, and there are people who don't like it. but it's on the A+, so let's at least talk about it so you can make your own choices on this. The whole idea behind SMART is to create values that are built into a hard drive where if we reach a certain threshold value on these particular little issues, the drive can say, hey, I've got a little bit of a problem. The whole idea behind SMART is to give someone a clue that a hard drive is going to die soon. That's the whole idea. There's no fixing in SMART. It's just a predictor. And there have been some interesting studies out there that say it's not so good. There are other people who love it. The bottom line is that I want you to be aware of it. Now, in the Windows world in particular, there's nothing built into your system that when a hard drive realizes that its sector allocation count or whatever these values are reaches a certain threshold, there's nothing built in for the hard drive to say to your system, hey, put this up on the screen so a human being can read it. If you're going to get a SMART error, main place you're going to see it more than anything else is in a BIOS. Lots of BIOSes have the ability to turn on SMART. So during the actual boot process itself, a system will query the drives, and if anything is bad, they'll show up during the boot process. So if you're one of these people who doesn't turn off your computer a lot, that's not going to be too terribly helpful for you. If you want to play with SMART in a Windows environment, you're going to have to use some third-party utilities. Like for example, here I've got the wonderful Passmark utility. Let me show you how this guy works. So I'm going to click on one of my particular drives here. Now, if you take a look, we have all of these bizarro different types of errors. Now, to hard drive manufacturers, these are really, really, really important values. And they will preset what they expect this value to be, and if it goes down to that value, then the drive itself will actually start making some kind of reporting if you've got the right tool. So these are the particular ones that this particular drive looks at. Your drive will look different. Every different manufacturer, even models within manufacturers, are going to have different SMART values that are important to them. So there's invariably some kind of testing tool, so I'm going to run a quick test here, and again, because I've got that SSD, this runs pretty quickly. And it's going to go through, and really all it's doing is more querying the drive than anything else. The drive is constantly keeping track of these types of things. So it's all done, and we can go in and take a look, and we can see the results of these. So basically he's telling me I've got a pretty good drive here, so I'm not too terribly worried about it. Now, other operating systems, in particular Apple's, if you've got OS X, SMART is pretty much built into the operating system itself. And if errors do show up, they show up readily and within the operating system. The bottom line with SMART is that it is a predictor that a drive is going to die. So if you start getting SMART errors, guess what you're going to do? That's right, you're going to go out and buy yourself a new hard drive. I get a lot of calls from people, and they're like, well, Mike, I have my wedding pictures or something, and I can't just put in a new drive. I need this drive fixed. Well, first of all, I'm going to laugh at you a little bit, because in this world of cloud storage and cheap thumb drives, you couldn't take the time to back up your wedding pictures, okay? So you deserve a little pain. All right, now I'll be nicer than that. There are ways to fix these, but not at our level. There are a number of companies out there who can actually go in, they have the tools and the facilities, the clean rooms, to go in and actually recover the data. Your drive is dead, okay? So now we're just talking about data recovery. Lots of great companies out there. I've used a company in California called Drive Savers a number of times, but I'm going to warn you right now, this is a very expensive process. What you need to do is brace for the fact that you're going to be paying a minimum of $500, and it could also run up into the thousands. So use your backups. So that's the bottom line when it comes to hard drive troubleshooting. There are some basic tools we can use, but always remember, say it with me, people, back up your data and get yourself a new hard drive.